Hi everybody, Dan Illman along with Matt Bernier. Welcome to Breeders' Cup Focus. Each week here on DRF TV, we will profile a division leading up to the Breeders' Cup. In this edition, we're going to take a look at the Breeders' Cup Mile. Let's take a look at the preliminary morning line odds as set by DRF national handicapper Mike Watchmaker. This list compiled by Daily Racing Form analyst, foreign correspondent, handicapper Marcus Hirsch. And you can get all of the latest updates at drf.com/BC. and each Friday in the print edition of Daily Racing Form. Matt, we expect a very solid European contingent coming to Churchill Downs for this year's Breeders' Cup Mile, and one of the interesting prep races might very well have been the Prix du Moulin at Longchamp on September the 9th. We've got several horses on this list that competed in the Prix du Moulin, and we're going to swing into the stretch, and the winner of the race was the favorite Recoletos, who kind of won a blanket finish, and all year long it seems that these European milers have taken turns beating each other. I thought this was a game performance, however.
Yeah, certainly. I don't think you can really knock any of the top 2 or 3 finishers in this spot. I will say, though, it feels like in prior years, we've had a real standout miler come over here from Europe, and people have been chomping at the bit saying this is the horse that's going to be the winner. And unfortunately, I believe we had a defection a few weeks back. And if the horse that was supposed to come over here was going to, she would have ended up anyway, being one of the heavy favorites. Unfortunately, now you're left with a group of horses that they're all solid, but I don't think you've got any standout in here. Makes the race a little bit difficult to handicap, but it could possibly make it rewarding from a wagering standpoint.
And at this early date, it's still too early to tell which Europeans will compete. Of course, they've got Champions Day at Ascot and the Queen Elizabeth II Champions Race on October the 20th. Recoletos expected to go there, but this is a multiple Group 1 winner who was turned back in distance. This horse was third in the French Derby last year, but ever since cutting back to a mile seems to be very consistent. But you and I, we look at that blanket finish, and I just don't see a world beater. The horse that ran third in the Prix du Moulin was a horse that was really running well late, and that was Expert Eye, a horse who's done some good work in group company. It was nice to see him finish that race because his best distance is 7 furlongs, I think.
Yeah, and that's really sort of the thing to keep in the back of your mind with all of these Europeans coming over here, whether it is in the mile, whether it's in the filly and mare turf, or even the turf. But more specifically, these middle distance races, the mile, a flat mile over there is generally considered a more demanding test than our mile is over here. So when you get a horse finishing up well over there, usually I would like to think that that translates over here to the States.
Plumatic goes out for the Andre Fabre barn. We saw him finish 4th in the Prix du Moulin. This is a horse that was really getting a class quiz in that race. He competed in the Arc de Triomphe as a 45-to-1 long shot last year. It didn't work out as a 3-year-old against the superstar Enable. He's slowly gotten back into good form, but I think there are some class concerns at the Group 1 level, but he's trained by a master horseman.
Certainly is. We've seen what they're capable of, those connections in the past, and I think it's an interesting note that you brought up that you try him at that 1.5 miles last year in a race like the Arc. Clearly, that's not his forte. That's not what he's excelling at. Now, perhaps this turn back to a middle distance, this is going to be sort of the end-all be-all for a horse like this.
Lightning Spear is a horse that probably is rated as the best miler in Great Britain. Finishing 5th in the Prix du Moulin, really didn't kick from the back of the pack there. And it was interesting to note that that race was on firm going. I wonder if he needs a little bit of cut in the ground. Certainly that's possible at Churchill Downs in November. A solid horse, but a horse, again, that has a win, and then you see him running 3rd or 2nd or 4th, and he has his day, and all these Europeans just kind of have their day beating each other.
And that's kind of why I feel like in a year like this, where if there is no real standout coming over here, perhaps this is the opportunity to take a look at one of our local horses, one of our domestic horses. I know in the past we've had Tepin and Wise Dan. We've had a number of other solid winners here from the States. But maybe this is an opportunity where you get a square price on a horse that maybe falls through the cracks a little bit, that's based here in the United States or in Canada, and can take advantage.
Another European to follow down the road is Poly Dream, going out for Goldakova's connections, trainer Freddie Head. This is a horse who probably will be competing on the Arc undercard in the Prix de la Forêt. Certainly keep an eye on these connections. This is a filly taking on the boys. You don't worry about that with these connections and this horse of this sort of caliber. Now, the best North American hope right now is Oscar Performance. So we're going to take a look at his victory in the Woodbine Mile. And we know the horse can go 1.25 miles. He did so in the Secretariat Stakes last year at 3, and he was actually the beaten favorite in this year's Arlington Million. But his 2 1-mile races this year are kind of special.
They certainly are. That poker from Belmont Park and this one here. Now, I think you need to keep a couple things in mind, especially when talking about this race, the Woodbine Mile, the pace was so slow. Those fractions, that's not a mirage. 48 and 3, almost 48 and 4 for a horse of this caliber. No wonder he's going to have something left in the tank at the very end. I don't want to take anything away from Oscar Performance because he is very special when he's on his best. And he also doesn't have to have the lead. I think that's something to keep in mind. But I have to be honest, coming out of that race, I would be a little bit more inclined to give a look to the third place finisher. To be honest, I thought Stormy Antarctic ran just fine there.
And Stormy Antarctic is scheduled to make his final prep for the Breeders' Cup Mile at Keeneland in the Shadwell Turf Mile. And we're going to find out a lot more about Stormy Antarctic in that spot as he takes on last year's Shadwell Turf Mile winner Suédois, both 20-1 on Watchmaker's preliminary morning line. The key to this race, and it's so early to even think about it, but we know Oscar Performance likes to be on the lead or close. We have a very speedy North American-based runner listed at 15-1, Matt, and that's Heart to Heart. And Heart to Heart didn't really fire last time out in the 4-star Dave at Saratoga, but there's one thing we know. He's a speed, and he and Oscar Performance could conceivably compromise each other if they both go. Heart to Heart expected to compete in the Shadwell Turf Mile as well.
I think the only positive, and I don't want to say the only positive, but if you're looking at those two heads up, I think the fact that Oscar Performance has proven the ability and shown the ability to be just as effective sitting off of a target as he is outright on the lead, I think that at least gives those connections, Brian Lynch and company, a little bit of, you know what, okay, if Heart to Heart wants to go, we know we are fully capable of going and getting a horse of that caliber. Now, on the flip side, you've got a horse like Heart to Heart where at his absolute best, he can throw it down and he can keep going. We know what he's capable of. He can swell up and get brave out there on the front end if he's allowed to go out there and dictate things on the front end. If he has a straw in his path, he's a totally different horse. And again, really it's going to boil down to how far do they want to let him go. You give him an inch, he can take a mile.
And that's very apropos in the Breeders' Cup Mile, Heart to Heart. I think as he's nearing the end of his career, you just got to say, we've tried to rate him time after time again, and it just isn't the same as when he is allowed to run and gun on the lead. And I agree with you. Oscar Performance, I think he would be more than happy to concede just a little bit because this horse has shown the ability to sit. I'm not sure Heart to Heart has that ability to sit, pass, and win. It's going to be a really interesting Breeders' Cup Mile. European horses going to be prepping in the Shadwell Turf Mile at Keeneland, perhaps a late prep in Europe as well. And then we'll see what we get out of horses like Heart to Heart in the Shadwell Turf Mile. Again, these ratings updated in each Friday's print edition of Daily Racing Form and daily, drf.com/BC. We'll see you next week for Breeders' Cup Focus. We'll talk about the Classic and the Distaff.